Hello everyone, today I want to talk about how Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang said that anyone who belittles Huawei is extremely naive and ignorant. Also, US and Australian media are saying that Trump is lowering himself just to get a visit to China, and that he's reversed his stance on the fentanyl issue to praise China. But honestly, Trump has already said all the nice things he could about China. On July 17th, at the White House, he signed a bill to temporarily suspend the fentanyl ban. This bill increases the penalties for drug crimes involving fentanyl-related substances. In fact, the families of patients who died from fentanyl overdoses also attended this event. Back in February this year, Trump claimed that due to the issue of fentanyl imports, he imposed a 20% tariff on Chinese imports. In May, both presidents reached a trade truce agreement in Geneva, but this 20% tariff still remains in effect, and China has also retaliated by imposing tariffs on American energy and agricultural products. China has accused the US of using fentanyl as a means of extortion. Fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid painkiller, mainly used clinically for anesthesia and pain relief. In the US, it is the misuse of this drug by Americans, rather than an issue with the painkiller itself or the countries that produce its raw materials. Originally, it was expected that when Trump signed the temporary suspension of the separation of families at the border, he would criticize China. But on that day, Trump said, "I think China has been providing help. Ever since I came here, we have been in dialogue with China. They are taking significant steps, they want to take action, and we'll wait and see." The South China Morning Post said that Trump's latest positive remarks about China's stand in stark contrast to his harsh rhetoric earlier this year in February, when he announced additional tariffs on China over the fentanyl issue. When asked by reporters what he meant by China's significant steps, he said, "I believe we will find a solution that will have China ultimately sentence to death those who manufacture fentanyl and ship it to the United States. I believe this will happen very soon." The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is using this to criticize US fentanyl tariffs. In response to Trump's remarks, Lin Jian said China made it clear fentanyl is America's problem, not China's. The US ignored China's goodwill, imposing tariffs on Chinese companies, undermining drug control cooperation and harming China's interests. If you truly want to cooperate with China, you should face the objective facts and engage in dialogue with China in a manner of equality and mutual respect. Now that Trump is being criticized by China and not responding, even the American media have noticed the issue. On July 16th, Bloomberg reported, citing sources familiar with the matter, that Trump has softened his tone towards China in order to strive for a meeting between the leaders of China and the US and to reach a trade agreement. The softening of his confrontational tone towards China has become apparent. Citing some insiders, it was revealed that in meetings with Mnuchin, Trump is now often the least hardline person in the room when it comes to China.
Bloomberg noted that in nearly 6 months since retaking office, Trump has stopped harping on the so-called massive US-China trade deficit and resulting American job losses.
This lowering of his posture stands in stark contrast to his continued use of high tariffs to threaten other partners. At present, Trump is not focused on the so-called US-China trade imbalance, but is instead concentrating on reaching agreements with China and Europe. Similar to the trade agreements he reached during his first term. Then he celebrates the achievements he's made. You have to know, against the backdrop of China's booming exports, the country even posted a record trade surplus in the first half of this year. But Trump doesn't seem to care much about that. However, insiders say that Trump's unpredictable policy decisions, along with his tendency to back away from previously promised tough stances, have made both internal decision-makers in the US government and external advisors feel concerned. This week, a series of developments has further intensified these outside worries. The so-called red lines that the US previously set for China have now become bargaining chips for negotiation.
First, approving Nvidia's H20 chip sales to China. Sources said multiple senior US officials previously claimed this was off the table.
But this move has completely overturned that. The Trump administration had once declared a policy of strictly preventing the most critical technologies from flowing into China. Just last month, under pressure from several senators, U.S. Treasury Secretary Yellen even cited the export controls on Nvidia's H20 chips to China as evidence of the Trump administration's tough stance toward China. According to supporters, although the export of such chips still requires approval, some Trump administration officials privately opposed granting licenses, believing that doing so would boost the development of Chinese tech companies. However, some U.S. officials believe that allowing Nvidia to compete with Chinese companies in China, selling chips to China, is crucial to winning the AI race against China. People familiar with the matter say this viewpoint is similar to Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang's strong advocacy, gaining support within the Trump administration. The U.S.-China trade dispute remains on hold.
Second, the U.S.-China trade dispute continues truce, Bloomberg said.
The $9 billion in tariffs that were agreed upon, the truce period will expire on August 12. In theory, the previous high tariffs could be reinstated at that time. However, Treasury Secretary Bessent, in an effort to further ease market sentiment, hinted at this on the 15th. The originally scheduled deadline for the U.S.-China tariff truce next month is actually flexible. Bessent said, "I want to tell market participants not to worry about the August 12th date." He hopes he can meet with the Chinese side soon, possibly in a third country, and the meeting could take place in early August. A supporter said that the U.S.-China tariff truce period might be extended for another 3 months. Meanwhile, Trump has taken a tough stance toward other countries, including America's main allies, insisting on imposing additional tariffs and even issuing threats. Taking even more actions against the pharmaceutical and semiconductor industries is the third point, which is a shift in the stance of the China hawks.
Rubio met Wang Yi in Kuala Lumpur. Rubio, once the Senate's staunchest China hawk, called the talks very constructive and positive post-meeting.
But after this meeting, when speaking to the media, Rubio described the talks as very constructive and very positive. Bloomberg reports that Trump's current moderate attitude toward China is causing divisions within his advisory team. Recent developments have sparked concerns among some people. If the Chinese side makes demands, to what extent would a Trump administration be willing to compromise on national security policy? At the same time, the situation is being closely watched not only by the US's allies in Europe and Asia, but also by some companies. During the Biden administration, the US originally tried to leverage the power of these foreign companies to suppress China's tech industry. Supporters believe that government officials and industry leaders in these regions have already received a clear signal that Washington's strategy may have changed. There are as many as 6 tech industry groups that have interacted with the Trump team on this issue. Officials say that after meetings, they often seek more details about US policy, only to find that the core objectives of the US have already shifted in subsequent discussions. However, Bloomberg concludes that Trump is already well known for frequently changing his stance in conversations. After he states a position, he quickly changes it again. Of course, it's not out of the question that Trump's stance could flip-flop once more. In addition, Nvidia's Jensen Huang visited China for the 3rd time this year, and some of his remarks are worth paying attention to. During his attendance at the Chain Expo, Huang was interviewed by the media and responded to topics related to China's top tech company, Huawei, among others. Huang emphasized that anyone in the world who underestimates China's manufacturing capabilities is extremely naive and ignorant. Huawei is an exceptionally strong company. He has seen firsthand the technology Huawei has developed, especially in relation to Nvidia's core product, the GPU graphics card. Huang marveled that Nvidia has been making GPUs for 30 years, while Huawei has only been at it for a few years, yet they are already able to compete with Nvidia on the same stage. That alone speaks volumes about Huawei's strength. He said, "No one should underestimate themselves." He devoted his whole life to creating something, pouring immense passion into it. But the fact that Huawei can achieve results so close to theirs says it all. Huang believes that Huawei has achieved remarkable accomplishments. In areas like chip design, systems engineering, network technology, chip packaging, and photonic shells, Huawei has performed outstandingly, and they also have their own independent cloud services. In contrast, Nvidia focuses on chip systems and software development, but does not provide cloud services. Huawei develops the market with its complete ecosystem, and its overall strength is impressive. He said that we should always learn from all competitors, including Huawei, but at the end of the day, Huawei really does an outstanding job. To sum up what Wang Wingfan said, first, because Huawei is one of the few companies in the world that can achieve comprehensive innovation from algorithms, architecture, system software, hardware, system networking technology, to chip design, their technical strength is extremely strong. Even Nvidia has praised Huawei, which shows just how powerful Huawei's technology is. Second, in the past, during globalization, each major corporation had its own area of expertise. Huawei wouldn't get involved in chip manufacturing, that's TSMC's specialty. Huawei also wouldn't make GPU, when they worked on AI, they would buy from Nvidia. But before the technology blockade was imposed on Huawei, even though Huawei was forced to do things on its own or team up with other Chinese companies, in the end, it had to become a very strong competitor to American companies.